I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. Peter Singer, a strategist at the New America Foundation, professor of practice at Arizona State University, and founder and managing partner at Useful Fiction. Dr. Singer is a New York Times bestselling author, described in the Wall Street Journal as the premier futurist in the national security environment, and an all-around smart guy in the Washington Post. The Smithsonian named him one of the nation's 100 leading innovators. Defense News lists him among its 100 most influential people. Foreign Policy added him to their top 100 global thinkers list, and he's an official mad scientist for the U.S. Army's Training and Doctrine Command. No author, living or dead, has more books on the professional U.S. military reading lists. So, Peter, welcome, sir. Thank you so much for joining me. It's truly an honor to have you
Oh, that's
with
kind
me
of you,
today.
Tim. Thank you.
So today, really, our focus is autonomous weapons. And I wanted to start out with your book, Wired for War. Again, I think this came out back in 2009, but it is so timely and more relevant than ever. It's all about drones and robotics on the battlefield. Can you tell me a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write it?
Sure. So it connects, I think, a broader thread in my work, which has been trying to identify new trends, new technologies that I think are going to be incredibly important, and yet people at that moment are not paying enough attention to. And so that was a project looking at the increasing use of robotics and AI. To more recently, I've done projects, looking back on everything from social media and its weaponization to cybersecurity to AI. We'll talk about those later. But with Wired for War, the origin point for it was actually I was at a conference looking at what was going on in national security, and it had all the leaders and experts back around like 2005, and the Iraq War was going on, and for multiple days they talked about all the things that they saw changing, and not a single U.S. military leader or academic said the word robot or unmanned. And yet I had friends that were commanding squadrons of drones that were, flying over Iraq and Afghanistan, even though that friend in the Air Force was never leaving the United States. Or you had other people that were working with bomb disposal robots in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so it just struck me as this disconnect between, wow, we've got science fiction coming true. We've got robotics starting to be used in our wars, and yet we're not talking about what it means. And so that overall book was basically a sort of tour of everything from let's go out and meet the soldiers that are using the robotic systems, the enemy that's fighting them, the designers, the inventors of the robots, to the science fiction authors who inspired them. And along the way, we'll learn about everything from how are they used to exploring legal and ethical questions that they raise, and what does it mean about war writ large. And it was a really interesting project to work on. And I think you've laid out what's been remarkable is, this start a decade back. Now, what was abnormal, what was new is literally the new normal of warfare when you look at what's happening in conflicts like Ukraine.
It is. It's the transformation has been crazy. It almost seems like it's kind of come out of nowhere. Although obviously you saw this coming, over a decade ago, and you were writing about it back then. So in terms of your trends and predictions, I mean, what has come true for the most part, and what is yet to come true, I guess? How would you say that your analysis has been looking back over that book?
Interesting. So the book established that this was being utilized in war, that we would see more use in a wide variety of roles and by a wide variety of actors, and that while it would open up new opportunities and capabilities in warfare, it would also create some really thorny legal, ethical, political questions. And I think we've seen each of those play out in certain ways. And there's other aspects, of course, that maybe moved faster or slower that was laid out. As an example, the at the time, the focus was on use in Iraq and Afghanistan by U.S. military. It laid out how we would also see enemy forces utilize them, including non-state actors. And that certainly happened. If I was to do that book now, I would probably add a little bit more on China and the amazing growth that we've seen in not just the Chinese civilian, but also military side of robotics, work on AI, probably explore a little bit more around different, not just approaches to the industry, but also how people look at the law differently. And what does that mean for the future? So that would be, one change. I think the book got right on the political side, the so-called drone wars, where you didn't just have it used on the military side. You had these counterterrorism strikes into places that were outside declared war zones, like Pakistan and Somalia, and that started very small numbers during the Bush Jr. And then just accelerates during the Obama administration, and then continues during the Trump administration. I think the scale of it got that right. The scale of it probably was a little higher than I expected. The political challenges of it were certainly borne fruit. And then the last thing is, if I was doing that book now, probably a little bit more on the lethal autonomy debate. Much of the robotic systems back then and still today are they're still human controlled in some way, shape, or form. We can have a longer discussion around that, but basically the human is still in the loop. But most of the research now is on moving to autonomy. And so, just by the sheer nature, of the timeline, that's the next big change that's sort of playing out in front of us. And that, of course, takes you down even further, sci-fi, but also, legal and ethical questions.
Oh, absolutely. And, it seems to me, like there's a paradigm shift happening. And I wanted to ask you about this because in the current Ukraine conflict, right? Again, we're moving from, the Predator drone was basically like a light aircraft that was remotely controlled. And then the Reaper, basically, they attached a Hellfire missile to it. It's still kind of a somewhat traditional paradigm, it seems like. But, right now, both Russian and Ukraine forces are using drones. They're using them all the time. Russia's launched over 330 drone strikes so far. They have thousands more that they could potentially be launching in the next year or so. And Ukraine is actually using even smaller, lighter drones that they're crowdsourcing the funding for. So have we seen a paradigm shift in terms of the way these are used in warfare, do you think?
Yeah, I think we were seeing a change that in many ways, you could make these historic parallels to, whether it's the first use of the airplane back in, it was actually before World War I. It was in Italy uses it versus Turkish Ottoman forces fighting in what's now Libya, to certain introductions of like missiles in World War II. I'd say there's real quickly four big shifts as you lay out there. One is the context. When I started the book Wired for War, we were just starting to see robotics used, and I remember having to just persuade people, one, that they're real, and two, that they were useful in certain contexts. I remember literally explaining to a U.S. senator that okay, the Predator, there's no cockpit, there's no like human inside it. Literally, like, no, it's there's no window, there's no person inside. That's where we were back then. And similar kind of arguments with military officers on the use of the system and how it would be more and more valuable. But basically, a little over a year ago, the debate had shifted from having to argue the value of these technologies and they're real to essentially it was okay. I get that they're useful in counterterrorism and counterinsurgency, the kind of wars we were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, but they won't be useful in major conventional conflicts. That was the tenor of the debate, whether it was pushback from military leaders to there was an article in the leading academic journal for security studies, international security, a little over a year ago that made that argument, saying unmanned systems, yeah, they're valuable in this kind of war, but they're not going to be valuable in big wars. Ukraine has ended that debate. We have seen them, serve a role in a major conventional conflict. And so that debate's over. Second thing is the way that they've been used, as you talked about. It's both, we've seen small scale systems to large systems, ones that range from size of large airplanes to handheld. That has meant a shift in not just thinking about them used singularly, but in so-called swarming. And we're just at the start of this, where you're trying to sort of overwhelm, flood the battlefield. Related to that is the civilian technology application. And that would be the third area. Most of the unmanned systems that have been used to such effect by Ukraine and by Russia in some cases have been civilian ones, either brought over directly or jury-rigged in some manner. So it's everything from the owner of a electronics store in Kyiv, when the Russians come in, basically gives away all the civilian drones to Ukrainian forces to utilize. There's a fun story of a 6-year-old Ukrainian boy donates his drone to the Ukrainian army, which uses it to sight Russian forces. But then we've got these jury-rigged ones. Someone took a racing drone and turned it into a loitering munition. It's basically sort of think of like a mini cruise missile that hit with such accuracy it took out a Russian soldier in an open doorway. And that leads to the fourth and final shift is, as we were talking about earlier, it's the application of more advanced software. So in terms of more autonomy, the AI side, we've seen this in Ukraine where, it's, as I noted, it's everything from more advanced targeting to, this is not on the drone side, but we've seen, for example, face recognition software used by the Ukrainians. So again, just at the start of what will become more and more commonplace in war.
Okay, so that's airborne drones. Now, in addition to those, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, there's the development of things such as drone tanks, right? And I have a list of these, like the Milram, the Ms. Ripsaw M5, the Milos UGV, Foster Miller Talon. There are many more of these. They're being developed by a number of different nations, right? Many within NATO, some outside of NATO. All of these are heavily armed. Currently, these all require a human operator to pilot them, much like, an airborne drone, except that it's tank. But we will probably see some more autonomy in that as well. I think this is an area that you've touched on as well, right?
So, you and I are being bad in using the term drone, which is the colloquial. And there's that's the shorthand. What we're talking about here is unmanned systems, to use a more formal military term, and then we move into remotely operated. There's a whole variety of terminologies, but, drone has become a catch-all, and then we'll soon move to just saying robotics. But as you noted, they come in a variety of sizes, shapes, forms, and operate in a variety of domains, and they serve a variety of roles. So if we think about sizes, they range in size from there are ground systems that are they're bigger than a dump truck, to there's ones that are literally microscopic. the forms. They range from ones that look like the manned platform that they are replacing. So it looks like a driverless car, it looks like a plane. Or it might be of a completely different form. It might be something, a quadcopter, or it might be something that's inspired by nature. So we have ones that, look like, for example, a snake, or a robotic cheetah, a robotic mule. And we've all seen sort of in ones that even have a bipedal form, like a human. The roles that they play. They might be for what we call ISR, which is basically, gathering intelligence, gathering information. They might be for delivery of logistics, of medicine, or it might be delivery of a kinetic effect of lethality, weapon, and they're armed. Even within that, you've got this split between, is it like a Predator drone, or the Turkish version that the Ukrainians have been using, the TB2, that it fires a missile off the drone, or it's one that we call a loitering munition, just another term. They say, a kamikaze drone. It's kind of, it's a machine, but it's committing suicide. But that's akin to the Russians have been using Iranian manufactured systems like that, where it's a drone, but then it converts into a missile. They operate in a variety of domains: in the air, at sea, on the land, and we'll see them as you move into conflict in space. So just a wide variety. I think the future of this is this continued proliferation, but it's also about how do they work together. So there's the teaming of human and machine. And again, whether we're talking about Amazon's plans in the civilian world to the US military's plans in war, that teaming arrangement, it might be one where the robotic system is acting as a kind of aid to the human. It might be where it is being delegated out into a certain role. It's a extension of the human's reach. It might be, no, it's a teammate, it's a wingman. Or it might be an agent that's autonomous, but acting on behalf of that human. And then we have that idea of, is it just one agent, or is it a swarm of them, which then the swarm has like an agency of its own? And again, so whether we're talking about, how Amazon's thinking about delivering packages, is it remote operated? Is it a teammate? Is it a single, or is it swarm? Or if you're thinking about the future of war at sea, these questions come to bear. And then you have the next level version, which is, okay, not just about human machine teaming, but also machine teaming. So how does that ground system work with that aerial system without any kind of human interaction? And those are the frontiers of all of this, where a lot of the research and exploration is.
Yeah. Well, in terms of human machine teaming, this brings us right to your next book that I wanted to mention, BurnIn. And I shouldn't say next book. You have written many, many books, but in terms of things that I absolutely wanted to ask about, BurnIn starts with the field test of the world's first police robot. And for people who think, oh, that's too far out in the future, I think, number one, they should keep in mind that Wired for War, right? That was dead on in terms of predictions. You were saying this is where things are going, and that's where we are. So, when you're writing about the field test, the world's first police robot, people should keep that in mind. And I think there are a couple of elements to that. A few years back, Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin demonstrated something called Fedor, which was exactly that. It was a humanoid robot, and they demonstrated it shooting a gun, of course. In the USA here, we've got Boston Dynamics Atlas, which has been doing more and more complex types of like parkour and gymnastics routines and things along those lines. So could you tell me a little bit about BurnIn? And I realized that this is kind of a fiction novel, but it's you're basically setting a stage for what you think may come, right?
Yeah, so BurnIn started out as a nonfiction project called AI Visualized, and it was basically trying to understand what are the most important things that people need to know about the future of AI and robotics. Everything from, how does it work, to what are the ways that everyone from corporations to the police are planning to use robotic systems and AI, to what are some of the dilemmas that we all need to understand, because it's going to enter into our work life, into politics, you name it. An example would be algorithmic bias. And so August Cole and I took that work on the nonfiction side and shared it out, rather than through a nonfiction book. We shared it out through a novel. We called the approach useful fiction. And so BurnIn, it's a novel. It follows the story of a hunt for a terrorist through the streets of Washington, D.C. around 15 years from now. And the protagonist, the people and the machine that are hunting for that bad guy, is an FBI agent who's been teamed with one of the very first of these robotic systems. So it's a kind of a sci-fi techno thriller, but it has these 300 things that you need to know baked into the story, and with the research in notes to show, hey, we're not just making this up. So, if you read about a certain robotic system and note, oh, here's Amazon's patent for it, or this scene where we're trying to find the terrorist in a crowd at a train station. That's exciting. It's also designed to teach you about algorithmic bias, as the FBI agents, being steered to certain faces in the crowd by the face recognition software. But is that really the bad guy, or is that what the software thinks the bad guy looks like? And so that's the concept of it. It's a fun story, but overall, so I'm not going to give away I gave you the setup for it. I won't give away the plot, but I will say there's sort of three broad lessons of it, beyond just these tidbits of, okay, how does AI work or whatnot. One is the idea of a robotics revolution. The subtitle of the book is so it's BurnIn, a novel of the real robotics revolution. And the idea there is that so much of the story of robots has been robot uprising, robot revolt, Terminator, Matrix, whatever it is. And yet in the real world, what we're entering into is a industrial revolution, a transformation of our society, work, family life, politics, because of these new technologies, AI, robotics, Internet of Things. And so that's the first, is to paint a picture of that and give people a sense of, what it is like as we see everything from our jobs change to how does that affect home life, to how does it affect politics. So that robotics revolution in the real. The second is what we were talking about earlier, that it's not about the machine. It's about the relationship between the human and the machine. And that's whether you're thinking about, how are we going to use this system in everything from medicine to the military to real estate to policing. It keeps coming back to that human machine relationship. And it's as much about the humans trying to figure out the machine as it is the machine trying to figure out us, because we're complicated. And then the third aspect, and it's, I think, very relevant to a lot of things going on, especially in the social media side, is that notion of one person's utopian vision is another person's dystopian vision. And, so an example is there's scenes in the book where it's not just about the hunt for the terrorist. We follow the main character, Keegan. She takes her daughter into a store. And as she enters the store, the greeter at the store greets her and her daughter by first name. And she has a new kind of pause, which, we would previously, when you went into a store and it was, oh, they know me. They know my kid. We've been here a bunch of times. Instead, is it they actually know me, or is software from their surveillance network and the pings coming off my phone, including about my daughter, revealing to the greeter at the store personal information about me? And so on one hand, the company's like, we're going to make you feel comfortable by greeting you by name as you arrive. On the other hand, that gives you that sort of pause of, ooh,
Yeah.
do I like? And so again, you can see the utopian or dystopian part of that. It's just a small example. A different example would be, as we think about robotic cars or driverless cars. Okay, but what does it look like when they're made by wildly different companies with different conceptions of how safety works? And so, the opening scene of the book, without giving too much away, is our protagonist is in a traffic jam. Guess what? We'll have robots in the future, but we're still going to have traffic. And part of it's because of, again, different companies, but also human drivers interacting with driverless machines. It's not going to work out perfect.
Well, and again, in terms of fiction coming true, in 2016, police officers in Dallas used a robot on U.S. soil to kill an active shooter because they didn't have any better options. And San Francisco recently voted to allow police to do the same in extreme situations. So I know that we're running short on time. I do want to touch on useful fiction. That's your newest project. Is there kind of a synopsis you could give me and a little bit of information about how people could get involved with that, learn more about it?
Sure. So the concept of useful fiction it's the deliberate blend of nonfiction, research, analysis with narrative, with story. A different way of thinking about it is it's a little bit like what I do to my kids in the morning. I sneak fruit and veggies into a smoothie. So at one end of the spectrum, to continue that, is you have a milkshake. A milkshake, it's designed for sweets, it's entertainment. That's, in writing terms, it's like, science fiction or techno thrillers, and I love them. And I love my milkshakes too. But it may have some good stuff in there, but it's not designed for it. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got your white paper, your strategy report, your trend report, your briefing for the board, your memorandum, whatever it is. It's important. It's good for you. It's just hard to get people to consume it. So it's kale. And so the idea of useful fiction is to take that kale, take that nonfiction content and transform it into a scenario that's designed to reach that target audience with greater effect. And to continue the idea of the smoothie, the science shows, not just with smoothies, the facts are more likely to be absorbed by that reader if they're put within a narrative. And so it started out with these novels that August Cole and I did called Ghost Fleet, and then we talked about BurnIn, and then it actually led to a business called Useful Fiction. So it's, if you want to go online, it's useful-fiction.com. And essentially we've been working with everything from US military to the British government to Fortune 500 companies, and turning their kale into narratives. So whether it's their strategy reports, their trend reports, whether the audience is a board of senior leaders, or it's the workforce, young lieutenants. Let's take that important content and transform it into something that people are more likely to engage with. And so it's been a lot of fun. And then we've also been running training workshops in it as well for, again, groups that range from universities to we're just off doing one for the U.S. Marine Corps. And yeah, it's been a blast. For me, the other part of it is it's been this dual experience of creativity, but also it's a business, and learning about that has been fun. And as every other entrepreneur listening knows, it's can be educational in the tough way as well.
Absolutely. Well, and I will put links in the notes as well, in the video notes. So, Peter, on that note, thank you again so much for your time today, sir. It has truly been an honor to interview you. And again, Wired for War and BurnIn, I would recommend that anyone watching this check out those books. I will put links into those as well as your website and Useful Fiction.
Great. Thank you. Take care.